you are worth the daily investment in your health, no matter how little the step is, because here's what I know. As a longevity researcher, someone who has studied musculoskeletal aging my entire academic career, is that there is never an age or a skill level where your body will not respond to the positive energy and stress you put into it to become healthier.
Hey everyone, before diving into the episode, I want to take a moment to invite you into our Mind Body Green ecosystem, where you can explore the infinite possibilities of health and well-being. All you have to do is click the subscribe button to hear more thought-provoking interviews with leaders in the health space. I am so grateful for all of you who have tuned in over the years, and let me tell you, it's only going to get better. So you've said, quote, "The bones and the muscles talk," unquote. Please tell us more.
You know, as an orthopedic surgeon and musculoskeletal doctor, I refuse to think of each organ system, the bones, the muscle, as these separate things. They have their own business. They're barely neighbors. The fact is, one cannot function without the other. Think of those skeletons you see hanging in, weird museums without their muscles. They're just hanging there with no structure. In fact, if we release them from their little stands, all the bones would just fall down. So the bones are critically interwoven with the ligaments that hold them together. Ligaments are made out of collagen, and the muscles that move them. So the first way they interact is, how are we going to move these bones to locomote? We're going to use muscles that contract to bend the joints, to propel the foot bones to hit the ground. But the other way they interact is, muscle is an endocrine organ which secretes myokines of various kinds that create a microenvironment which the bones live in. The other thing that's critically important in the relationship between bones and muscle is, as the muscle ends in a tendon, right? You've seen a chicken leg, the muscles of the leg end in that weird tendon. Well, that attaches to the bone. Here's a fun fact most people don't know, is that the muscle ending in the tendon attaching to a bone, it's the bone that has reached out with its little things called Sharpie's fibers. And if you can see my hands in the audio version, the Sharpie's fibers grab the tendon. And it is that relationship that connects them together. So you can't talk about a moving entity like people without talking about the role of the muscle and the bone.
So how does one go about assessing their baseline in terms of their muscle health, their bone health, their mobility, joints, all of the above?
So, oh gosh, that is a big question, right? So let's start with bone. How do we assess bone health? Well, how do bones even form? Our bones, when we're born, are really soft. They have not yet fully mineralized, and cartilage growth plates over time expand and then solidify to become our adult bones. And that's not really what we're talking about now, but our adult bones then, through your entire lifespan, are dynamic. They are constantly in an active process of resorption, led by a cell called an osteoclast, OC clast, and then followed behind in a 5-step process with an osteoblast, the building. So this is a dynamic process. Our bodies love to be in harmony. It does not like one thing out of function with another. So imagine on a long bone, the osteoclasts are crawling up the bone that stops. It does its thing, which is creates an acidic environment and scoops out a little area that and resorbs all the minerals that our body uses. The bones are storehouses of calcium and all of the micronutrients our body uses for our enzymatic reactions. And we need it. So we go get a little bit, resorb it with our osteoclast. And then our osteoblast comes up behind, gets attached to the same deficit and builds bone. And this goes on our entire lives, such that every 10 years we completely remodel our bones. And this continues and continues until what? Well, in women, until estrogen walks out the door, because estrogen is a major control factor for the activity of the OC, Without estrogen, the osteoclastic activity, its differentiation, its programmed cell death is unbalanced, and we resorb more than we build. And so that's how do we know that that's going on? A DEXA scan. So a DEXA scan is relatively cheap. Insurance companies will only pay for it if you're over 65 or you have a risk factor. But I'm going to tell you, Jason, that is completely too late, because if we don't find out that we're osteopenic, meaning low bone density, or osteoporotic in risk of frailty until we're 65, I won't swear at your audience, but I'm a surgeon, so I tend to. So your audience has a lot of 35-year-olds in it, right? 35 and up. So I say to youngish women, 35 to 45, which I call the critical decade to get your proverbial shit together, let's figure out our bone density, because we have a whole generation of women who have played sports their whole lives. And if many of them we know live in relative energetic deficit. It's those athletes with really low body fat. They hadn't had periods for years. I was one of those athletes. We probably didn't lay down enough bone. So let's find out our bone density early and then do something about it. How do we know how strong our muscles are? Well, we can measure that in any gym, but easy ways that are connected to measures of all form mortality and longevity are something as simple as a grip strength. It's a surrogate measure for total body strength. Or can you do 11 push-ups if you're a woman? Or can you do 40 within a minute if you're a man? As general measures of how strong we are. I mean, for preoperatively, we know how fast you get up from a chair and walk can predict your future.
Are those real numbers, the 11 and 40?
Well, the real numbers are 11 and 22. Yeah, 11 and 22. If a woman cannot do 11 real push-ups and a man cannot do 22 real push-ups, we have some work to do.
And what about joint health, mobility? Because I could have strong bones, I could have strong muscles, but if you ask me to get up quickly off the ground, it's not going to happen.
Because of stiffness in your joints.
Yeah.
So listen, so what is a joint? For those people who are finance people and they're like, that's my knee, but I'm not sure what it actually is. Joints, as you know, are the space occupying of two different bones, and their bones are covered by a smoother than ice. For you physics people, the coefficient of friction is less than ice. Cartilage, right? It's glistening. It's like a bumper. It allows our joints to move smoothly. Well, cartilage can be damaged in multiple ways. I was the head football doctor for the University of Pittsburgh and Georgia State for most of my career. And 20-year-old people, athletes of all kinds, can destroy their cartilage and get arthritis, which makes their joints stiff. But if we don't traumatically destroy our joints over time, the reps we do, the weight we bear, our nutritional status, our hormonal status can affect our cartilage. So when our cartilage starts to wear, that's called arthritis. It can happen at any age, and it creates all kinds of inflammatory cytokines that makes our joints stiff. So if you're a young person, Jason, if you find your joints are stiff, it could be, I doubt for you, but it could be simple lack of mobility, right? We're sitting at our desk 20 hours a day. We're not doing anything, and we get stiff. That can be retrained. If we're stiff because our cartilage is wearing away and we have inflammatory cytokines, there are lots of things today we can do to supplement the joints.
And how does one assess that? Because, I'm no spring chicken. I feel young. I'm 49, but I'm an ex-college basketball player, and I know I've done damage. I've done damage to my ankles. I've done damage to my knees, and I did a lot of damage to my shoulders, but I'm relatively fine. However, with that said, I'm very careful about avoiding injury, about limiting certain activities, about thinking how quickly I move, whether it's, getting off the ground or how fast I move my knees or how I extend my arms. So with all that said, whether you're someone like me who's had injuries in a middle age, whether I'm a male or a female, or maybe I'm younger, how does one assess like how they're doing? So like hear you loud and clear on the DEXA, loud and clear on the push-up test, or grip strength, but how does one start to get a sense of how they're doing in terms of their joint health?
So, how do we know our joints are working? So, it can be as simple as actually noticing yourself. Jason, we're so busy. Sometimes we don't even notice what's going on. Can you fully move your joints through their range of motion, your chin to shoulder and shoulder? Does your arm even come up to full range of motion anymore, or has it become stiff over time because we're bent over desks? And going joint by joint to look at, wow, my wrists don't even move back enough to do yoga anymore. Joints, unless they're crushed by arthritis, joint motion can be restored. But there are many fun tools out there, whether you use an online system. I'm going to mention brands if that's okay with you, like Fusionetics, which you hold your phone up and it sees you in 3D space and it says, oh, your hips are stiff. Here's a bunch of exercises to help that. Or you come to a lab like mine in Orlando and we have 360 cameras, like probably some colleges, maybe your colleges had one, and we look at your motion in 3 planes and say, oh, your hip is vulnerable on the right, your knee is vulnerable on the left. So
You can do this in your lab?
we do. You should come do it.
We're there. I'm coming. We're going to Disney and we're going to your lab.
Yep. And we'll do your lactate threshold and your VO2 max, and we'll draw some biomarkers and we'll just assess you.
Question on the VO2 max. So, what my understanding of VO2 max, it's an important metric people should be aware of, but it's also like a brutal test. You're essentially running yourself or cycling yourself silly to like beyond exhaustion. And something I've heard through the grapevine is that we're going to get to a place in the very near future where there are going to be different methods that allow one to assess their VO2 max without killing themselves.
Those exist now, and they're surrogates. They're called submaximal VO2 max. So guys like the Tour de France, they are going as hard as they can, as fast as they can until they're throwing up, right? For mere mortals like me, but I've done VO2 max. So what there are algorithms. So you go as hard and as far as you can to the sub level, and then they can calculate your VO2 max. There's also a really easy test that you can do on any football field with a bunch of cones called the beep test. And it's just how much distance can you cover within the beeps of the music, and then you calculate VO2 max roughly. So you can do it sub maximally now without having to suffer like you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like, oh, how did I end up in your office surgery? Well, I was doing a VO2 max test, and now I'm getting, I tore my ACL. It's like longevity. So, going back to like people ending up in your office, ready for surgery. Are there, segueing back to my point of how I'm very focused on, staying healthy and fit and prioritizing what's important to me in terms of exercise modalities I enjoy, and thinking about the trade-off between how much do I enjoy this versus the risk of injury. So with that said, are there certain sports, exercises, surfaces, or everyday lifestyle activities that you think potentially create issues or even lead to surgery down the road that we should be mindful of?
I think the things that lead to surgery the most are trauma, not being prepared, and overuse. And so let me address those 3 things. Number one, I think the 40s for men is prime time. Honestly, you know your sport well enough. You're finally out of your parents' house. You have some money to spend on your sport, and you're mostly still as strong as you were in your late 20s and 30s. And research bears that out. But so it is not a time to say, okay, I'm old, hang it up. But what it is a time to do, whether you're a man or you're a woman, because women, um, generally, I think prime time is also in the 40s for a lot of different reasons, but I don't believe there's ever a reason to say, I'm just too old, let's hang it up and wait to die, right? Because that's what you're basically saying. I'm just too old. So trauma. Well, any of us that play games, whether we're skiing or on a pickleball court, things will happen, but that's a very low percentage, honestly. The other two things is lack of preparation. This is what I see in my weekend warriors, right? We're really, really, really busy. We've got families and jobs to hold down. But what happens? We try to cram it all in on the weekend because something is better than nothing. But our tendons are short. Our ligaments are not flexible because we haven't done anything all week, right? Our muscles, our muscles are not primed for action. We haven't been pounding consistently. Bones can be conditioned to withstand pounding, right? And so too much, too soon, too often, injury. The third reason people get hurt is it's the opposite. They think I've got a limited amount of time. I'm going to do high intensity interval training every single day, 6 days a week. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to raise my cortisol. And overuse, just like in any athlete, can cause injury. And so, what I suggest people do is consistently invest in their mobility several days a week, maybe every day, but not the same thing every day. And I can tell you specifically how I prescribe activity for people.
Please do.
Yeah. But those are the three: trauma, overuse, and not being prepared at all.
I think that's the big thing as you age in that so I'll use me as an example. So as I mentioned, I played basketball in college. I still love the sport. And I think for me, I don't play anymore. And it's for a couple of reasons. One, it's a sport that requires a lot of like quick movements. And the reality is I don't have the time to put in to make sure my body is equipped to be ready for those quick movements on a daily basis. Like the sport's demanding. And the mind, my mind doesn't make the connection that I can't do that like I used to. If I see the ball coming off the rim, I still think I can jump well above the rim and get there quickly. And the reality is I can't. And I think that's a challenge, whatever the sport may be for ex-athletes. Your mind still has this, it doesn't, hasn't let go of I used to be able to do this, and instinctively you try to do it. But the reality is very few of us have the time to put in the training on a daily basis to keep everything, where it needs to be to avoid injury.
Well, and I think that's a critical point, Jason, that you don't have the time to prepare.
And I want to spend time on surfaces too, because this is something I'm mindful of. Because sometimes my joints my knees can act up a little bit. I'm very mindful of where I spend time walking to some degree. The reality is concrete is the predominant surface we walk on, but I try to be mindful of our children when they're running around is, hey, let's maybe opt for the grass or like the rubber, the rubber track. Like, how do you think about surfaces as like the pounding of everyday surfaces, which to me is a little thing, but over time, if you're pretty active, it adds up.
You know what? We take about 1,000 steps a mile. So and if you do the math, you're right. If you get 8,000 steps, that's about 4 miles times 1,000. So I think it does matter the surfaces you are on. I think if we have a choice to play on softer surfaces, now for cutting sports like soccer, there's a whole debate whether that, promotes ACL injuries, but I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we're talking about the relative impact. So if you have the opportunity to play on a softer surface, a grass field versus a harder surface. Now, you can't play basketball on a grass field, but if you're going to go jogging, how about trail running? How about jogging on your golf course? So, you can cover a lot of ground if your golf course will let you sneak on. But you know what I mean? If you can choose how you're going to spend your 8,000 steps, I mean, I think that's wise because cartilage, do you know how I kill cartilage in the lab? We used to kill cartilage by dropping a marble on it. It is very sensitive to load. That's why body load and muscle strength, so absolute axial body load and muscle strength as it relates to shock absorption are critical for joints. So surfaces play into that.
So building off of load, I want to talk about resistance training? Because something you're an advocate of, if I am correct, is women as they age. Sounds like women should be thinking about heavier load, more weight, lower reps versus a man per se maybe doesn't have to focus as much. And I'm saying lower reps, less than 8 or 10 reps. Is that correct? And why is that?
Yes. So, when you had Stacy Sims on, you said, and people loved her. And so when she came out with her book, Next Level, of course, I grabbed it and read it. She and I are friends, and she lists an entire body of work that shows that for women, lifting heavy, fewer reps stimulates muscle protein synthesis. Number one. Number two, it stimulates the neuromuscular pathways such that more motor units contract at once, which gives us strength and then power, right? And heavy load, plyo in particular, can stimulate the satellite cell replication. Now, satellite cells are muscle stem cells, which is what my lab studied before we called them satellite cells. We called them muscle-derived stem cells. It was the just to give credit, the lab of Dr. Johnny Huard, and we had a lab called the translational lab that worked with them. And heavy lifting, 3 to 6 reps per compound motion, and I'll explain in detail, 3 to 6 reps for each compound motion, about 3 to 4 sets, is what makes the best muscle protein synthesis neuromuscular pathways for women. So here's what women have been taught to do over time. Oh, don't hurt yourself. You don't want to get too big. Pick up the mamby-pamby pink weight, lift it 20 times 4 sets. And I call that garbage because you got to think about, why are we lifting? Well, I'll tell you all the reasons I lift, but why are we lifting? Well, now the women I care for, the women I serve, which is your population, we are lifting for longevity and for power, because I am not on my watch going to allow anybody, because I haven't said it, to become frail and not to be able to hold up their own body weight and fall from a standing position in their kitchen and break their hip. 50% of them will not return to pre-fall function and 30% will die. Not on this orthopedic surgeon's watch. So when I tell you to lift heavy in a certain way, it's because let's not spend garbage workouts. Let's make it matter, right? So what am I talking about? 3 to 6 lifts. Well, your audience has heard it before. To make it simple for my people, I took an average. I'm like, okay, 4 reps, 4 sets. Anybody can remember that. What am I doing for those workout? Well, push pull on the arms, push pull on the legs. So what are arm push pulls? Bench press type activity, pull up type activity. That is compound. I do not like people on machines. I like them under a bar or with free weights. Push pull.
Why not machine?
Because that's not the way our body works. When was the last time your quads worked in isolation sitting on a chair?
So I'll speak anecdotally for, my middle-aged male self. I like machines because they tend to be I can go heavier weight without having to worry about my joints. And I'm a little bit better on form. But again, maybe this is where men and women different, or maybe I'd be better off just lifting free weights, but that's me.
Well, listen, I would rather somebody do something than nothing. And I would rather not the fear of injury or failure keep you from your best health. So that's fine. But if I'm giving my best advice, it's to do free weights, because that demands neuromuscular pathway development and the building of proprioception where you are in space. It demands that your small muscles work with your big muscles, because you're standing on your own legs, you're unstable. For your legs, the push-pull is some kind of squat activity. I prefer to do it primarily with a bar and a deadlift activity, so push-pull. But that's only 4, right? And then I support those big lifts with everything that goes with it. So if I'm supporting my bench press, I also will do rows and biceps and triceps in more reps, but still only 8 reps, 3 sets, not 20 reps, 4 sets.
And how do you think about frequency? Is that something you do? Is it a splits program where you're doing, the pushes on Mondays? That would be, back, shoulders, tries, and then the pulls. Excuse me, not back, chest, shoulders, tries on one day, then back and buys in another day, and legs another day, or you do full body. Like, how do you think about what does this look like in a week?
Just split. So because I want to lift heavy, I don't wanna do both push-pull on lower extremities, push-pull on upper on the same day. So, what I love to do, what I sometimes don't have time to do, I love to give each one a day. Arm push, 2 days later, arm pull. But let's be realistic. On Saturday, I didn't have time last week to do 4 days. So on Saturday, I did squats and I did one of my arms. And so it was upper and lower on the same day. So you can also do that. I think it's hard to lift maximally on all 4 in one day.
But the beauty of what you're prescribing, if you're essentially saying 4 sets of, call it 4 to 6 reps, this isn't gonna take a lot of time.
It takes me 45 minutes. Yeah. Before I do any heavy lifting, I warm up, right? I have a series about 10 warm up exercises, hip swings, just body weight squats. Activate my glutes with banded monster walks, those funny lateral walks, just to get my joints full through their range of motion. Then, when I choose the lift I'm going to do, for instance, Saturday, this is what I did Saturday, I was going to squat. I just squatted the empty bar. So the empty bar is about 45 pounds. And I just did 5 reps, 4 to 5 reps, just to get my neuromuscular pathways going before I then started to load the bar. So I always warm up. I just don't, like golfers get out of the car, bring their clubs, take them to the driving range. So warm up and then go through your lifts. When I was done with my squat, which I did with plyo squat, then I would jump on the 24-inch box and then back and forth. Then I do a set of supporting things like step ups, or I can't remember what I did, but 4 or 5 supporting lifts to support my squats. And then I always end every day with 3 or 4 core exercises. And that's it, 45 minutes.
Well, this is fantastic. We're definitely gonna have to offline and get this in the show notes for folks to take action on. I wanna come back, you mentioned hit. So I'm thinking of, okay, I think we got resistance training. We've gone deep there, and then there's cardio and hit high intensity interval training. I know that we mentioned Stacy Sims. She is not a fan of that for women 40 plus. She says women need to do sprints, and then you got to be careful with hit. What's your view on hit and why it may not be the best for women as they age?
Well, listen, I used to do it 4 or 5 days a week, and I get why people wanna drive their heart. I can get I'm 57 years old, I can drive my heart rate up to 187, and I feel like such a whatever I feel like. But what happens when people do that, at least in my experience, I'm a practicing surgeon, I see people almost every day, they just get hurt a lot, and they're never recovered, and when they're hurt, then they have to take 3 weeks off, or I don't recommend that, but often people are told to rest, and then their brains don't get the dopamine and they're gripey for 3 weeks while they're trying to recover, right? So, what we know, and Stacy and I'm a big fan of knowing your lactate threshold. Now, we have a lab that does that. You can simply, in an estimative way, estimate 181 minus your age gives you what your low heart rate base training level is. And no, this goes back to the scientist who built our metabolic lab here where I practice, and we want people to do 3 hours a week of zone 2 training, which is lower heart rate. It's what endurance athletes do. It doesn't mean you're not working, but is the most metabolically productive time. You're burning fat instead of carbs. It's your base training. Then twice a week at least, I do want people to sprint per Stacy Sims. I want them to do, and people get wigged out by the word sprint because they envision Richardson or Bolt, right? No, my sprinting does not look like that. What I'm talking about is maximum effort. So for me, my zone two, I work out at a heart rate of 130, takes a 4 or 5 incline on the treadmill and a 4-ish speed. When I want to maximally effort, I pop it up to 11 and try not to fly off the back of the treadmill for 30 seconds, right? Maximum effort for 30 seconds and then completely recover. It takes me a couple minutes to get my heart rate back down. And you do that 4 times, a couple times a week. That is metabolically amazing, and it's what Stacy talks about. If you're trying to work on your VO2 max, the VO2 max type workouts are 3 minutes as hard as you can go, 3 minutes off. It's a little different cadence, but still higher effort, but not every day.
And how do you think about the everyday activities, whether it's walking or interval walking, where we're changing the pace, or potentially, going uphill or throwing on a weighted vest, taking the stairs, like how what I like to call exercise stacking, all the movements you have during the day. Walking is a big one and getting creative there. How do you think about that?
So we're talking about getting mobility in every part of our lives because people think that exercise or mobility has to be a certain time of day, and it does. However, when we're talking about do we do base training, do we do sprints, do we do VO2 max? But what we know is that the accumulation of mobility, whether you're walking far from the parking lot, you're climbing stairs as your coffee break instead of standing around a cooler. If you're on conference calls, doing wall squats while you're doing it, all of that matters. Because here's the deal, and this is how I like to say it. If we were designed to not move, to be stationary, as most of us are, we would have been made with sessile stalks like a mushroom. In nature, form follows function. All of our strongest muscles are below our belly buttons. So what does that tell us? We are designed to move and we should do it as often as possible. Otherwise, we would be made by like Jabba the Hutt, just a big sessile base, stability, not going anywhere. It's not how we're made.
So I'm going to come back to the hormonal changes that affect women as they get older. And on your Instagram, you had this great quote. You called estrogen the elixir of longevity. Tell us more.
I'm so glad you picked up on that. As I treat more and more women, and this has now been a 3 or 4 year process, coming to my office for something like frozen shoulder, only to have a deeper dive into everything that's going on with them in midlife. And then really learning about the role of estradiol in our lives. It's just not something that goes up and down during our periods, right? It is critical for all organs in both men and women's bodies. Men have estrogen, women have estrogen and testosterone, men have both. It's not a sex hormone, it's a hormone that has different roles. But for women, estrogen is critical for things like brain health, critical for bone health, critical for cardiovascular health, critical for building muscle. And when you think about what kills women, we die from hip fracture, we get frail, we fall down, we die of hip fracture and the consequences of it. The number one killer of women is heart disease. We also die of urosepsis when we get bladder infections because we don't have enough estrogen in our urogynecologic system. Those 3 huge killers of women are directly controlled by estrogen levels. So when I say something audacious like estrogen is the elixir of longevity for women, it's because it plays such a critical role in prevention of the things that kill us. And so if we can, by every woman needs to make the decision in a science-backed way, whether or not they are going to take hormone therapy once their estrogen walks out the door. Every woman gets that choice. But if you choose, you are choosing to decrease your chance of cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer of women, right? You're going to live longer. You're going to choose to maintain better bone density. If you don't fall and fracture your hip, you're going to live longer. If you don't die of urosepsis, you're going to live longer.
It feels like many experts are really coming around to HRT, and it seems to be something that every woman should seriously consider.
They should. And I know there's a certain percentage who have various cancer histories who are afraid of their genetics, but you know what? There is so much good data that allows us to have an individual risk benefit assessment so that we just don't cop to the grocery store tabloid, oh, my great aunt Gertie had some kind of cancer, I can't have this, right? So it takes a more serious approach that is science-based, not fear-based.
So we've talked about hormones, we've talked about resistance training, we've talked about cardio, we've talked about joints, mobility. One thing we have not talked about is diet. So I'll start with, how do you eat?
Oh, I love that question. I live an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. I don't call it a diet. I call it a lifestyle because then it's not hard, right? I grew up on a farm in Kansas and remember when I directly knew the source of my food. My dad would send me out there with a packet of bean seeds. I begrudgingly poked them in the ground. 4 months later, we'd have green beans, right? Talk about farm to table. I knew where my food was coming from. So here, when I don't have that luxury of a 5-acre garden, I still want to know that I am getting the freshest, least processed food that I can. So what do? I preferentially eat green leafy vegetables. I start my meals, even breakfast, with 2 hands full of spinach. I preferentially eat lean protein. Now I do eat animal protein. I like plant protein, but I get 1 gram of protein per my ideal body weight. So for me, I'm a muscly girl, so I try to get 120 to 130 grams of protein a day. So green leafy, lots of protein. I do not eat sugar. Sugar is baking us from the inside out. It is making us terribly inflamed. I do not eat simple carbs, meaning white anything, something highly processed, but I do eat carbs. I'm a very active person. It's not that we don't need carbs, we need fiber filled carbs. So I try to get 25 to 30 grams of fiber. How do you do that? That's hard, right? Well, 1 cup of northern beans has like 12 grams of fiber. It's amazing. Half an avocado, and we're halfway through our fiber for the day. So that's basically how I eat, but I'm not perfect. I try my best. I'm not perfect.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned protein. I think that is getting a lot of attention, specifically with women as they age. You need more protein and you need high quality protein. You need enough leucine. You got to hit that 2.5 grams per that 25 or 30 grams to make sure you trigger muscle protein synthesis. And this is where plant protein is just not going to cut it. You need high quality animal or fish protein. So I'm glad you mentioned that. What else? Is there anything else we didn't cover that women who are 35 plus should be thinking about in terms of lifestyle to make sure they're aging in a way for that's going to lead to extended health span, lifespan, and what I think is most importantly, joy span, because you have to have fun too.
That's so good. So you know what? A couple things I would want the women I serve to realize, and despite everything I say about base training, lifting heavy for your mind and body, you feel kind of a badass when you're lifting hard like that, but mind and body, having an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, the number one thing women seem to still be concerned about is what the scale says. So if I could pivot mindsets, I would do it in 3 ways. I would try to pivot people's mindsets from not what you weigh, but what you're composed of. How much muscle do you have? Right? I'll tell you, frequently say this online. At 40, I was in the best shape of my life. I was 19% body fat, training for triathlon, lifting a lot, and I was ramping up an incredibly busy career. And I thought at 47 I was going to die because estrogen was walking out the door. And I gained the 30 pounds that happens to us when nothing else changes. But the way I recomposed my body was not trying to just lose pounds on a scale. It was by lifting heavy, eating enough protein. And I have shifted my body composition back down to about 22% body fat, which is healthy for a woman of my age, right? So let's pivot our mindset to recomposing our bodies, not losing weight, number one. Number two, I would want people to shift their mindset from worshiping who we thought we were when we were 20. I look over my left shoulder because we are constantly talking about what we did in high school or what it used to be like. Well, I think we have a limited memory. It was physically easier, but the price of the joy and experience of life, the richer, deeper experiences, is aging. So if we can pivot from worshiping a time that probably wasn't so amazing anyway, because we were still in school, we were still living with our parents, we had no money, we didn't know ourselves, to really forward facing, this is going to be the best years of our lives if we are intentional. That's the second mindset shift. And then the third mindset shift that I think is so critical is that I want people to realize that they are worth the daily investment in their health. You are worth the investment for yourself, not just because you want to be healthy for your children or your spouses. You are worth it. And in investing in your own health, you will be there for everyone you want to be. But you as an individual soul are worth it.
I love that mindset. I want to come back to what you do. You're an orthopedic surgeon, and my story, my journey to Mind Body Green started when I had excruciating sciatica, L4, L5, S1, couldn't walk. Went to a doctor, said you need surgery. I view surgery as a last resort. So I sought a second opinion, and back surgery, the success rates at the time, I'm rewinding to 2008-9, weren't that good. Second doctor said the same thing, and he closed with, maybe some yoga could help. So yoga did help, and yoga essentially saved me from back surgery. I also made significant changes in my diet. You mentioned anti-inflammatory. That also played a significant role. Spiritual health, mental health, environmental health. I made a lot of changes that ended up being the inspiration for Mind Body Green. So with all that said, the question is, in my view at the time was the success rates with back surgery were not good. Maybe that's changed. In your view, where we sit today, because I know technology has advanced, it's incredible. One of my co-founders getting knee surgery, and he was like, it's just unbelievable. Like I'm in and out. It's like not what it was 25 years ago. And so in 2024, in your view, where does surgery work really well? And where, maybe it is the first option, and what other, and situations where, maybe it's the second or third option. How do you think about that? If I had to generalize, I know we're all unique individuals, different ages, sexes, and so on, but love your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think surgery is first choice in trauma situations where bones are on other side of the room
Yes.
and parts are absolutely apart, and there's no way that any kind of conservative intervention is going to help. Let's put you back together and let you heal. But you know what? I'm glad you asked me this, Jason, because I'm a whole person orthopedic surgeon. I don't view anybody as just their knee or their shoulder. So I always explore all the things that you talked about. I had a student yesterday and he's thinking to myself, I've never seen an orthopod talk about hormones and diet and all the conservative measures that can lead to an anti-inflammatory life and maybe get them out of pain without sticking a scope in the shoulder. Now, believe me, I love surgery. I'm very technically skilled, but it is, unless it's trauma, not the first thing I introduce to people. I introduce anti-inflammatory diet. I introduce the role of orthobiologics, which is harnessing the power of your own body through things like platelet-rich plasma to take your own growth factors and ask your body in an augmented way to heal for things like, I use platelet-rich plasma, 5 billion platelets drawn from your own blood for things like arthritis and get great success. For rotator cuff, great success. Tendon issues. At this point, when we started studying them in my lab in the 2000s and I was drawing my own blood, saying, I know there's an answer in the blood. It wasn't ready for prime time, but now there is some really good data in randomized controlled trials, which is the best kind of data, and in something called a meta-analysis, which takes a lot of those trials and aggregates the data. So I use those every day in my practice, and people fly in from all over the place for that kind of technology.
So you mentioned platelet-rich plasma. It is on the cutting edge. I'm curious, in that vein, what excites you? Where's the future of this field? What are you paying attention to?
Yeah, you know what? The other thing that I think we have just come, and I introduced this technology to Central Florida, I mean, practice wise, is nanotechnology, surgery through needles without incisions, with local anesthesia, not using narcotics. And I love this. I think it's the next paradigm shift. We used to do ACLs through huge incisions. Now we do them through arthroscopic incisions. Now with nanotechnology, I'm doing a lot of different surgeries, meniscus, cartilage procedures, rotator cuff, using a needle. And so why does that excite me? It's not actually the size of the hole. It is. It's kind of cool to make no incisions. What excites me is the rapidity of recovery. What excites me is not having to put somebody with a tube down their throat. What excites me is not contributing to the narcotic epidemic in this country, because after nano meniscectomy, for instance, people need an ibuprofen. They barely need crutches. They're like, why did you make me buy these crutches?
If you think of the things you want to avoid with surgery, it's being hung up, recovery time. You don't want to be on the couch for 2 to 4 weeks. This goes back to your earlier stat with falling. It's 25. I think it's 1 out of 4 people over the age of 65 fall. If you fall once, you're twice as likely to fall again. If you fall and break your hip, there's the 30 to 40% chance you die within a year.
You know this.
Yeah, it was in our book. I like, no, it's such a scary stat. That I'll just call out. You don't necessarily die because of the breaking of the hip, the fall. It's everything that can go wrong. It's the complications from surgery. It's the infection. It's the depression. It's the being immobile. And this one, anecdotally, I've seen unfortunately happen. So with that said, like if recovery is cut dramatically, that's huge. If narcotics, like we also have a opioid crisis, like that, you remove that, that's huge. This is a big deal.
It is. And not everything can be done right now through nanoscope, but you wait, Jason. It is not just a moving the needle. So, no pun intended, it's not just moving the needle on surgery, it's the new paradigm shift. So, just watch that. So, needle arthroscopy paired with orthobiologics, harnessing your own power to heal yourself, I think it's going to change how we approach cutting people.
It's fantastic. We covered so much today. Is there anything that we didn't cover or any words of wisdom you'd like to leave with our audience before we close?
I just want everyone listening to remember the one mindset thing that I said is that you are worth the daily investment in your health, no matter how little the step is. Because here's what I know. As a longevity researcher, someone who has studied musculoskeletal aging my entire academic career, is that there is never an age or a skill level where your body will not respond to the positive energy and stress you put into it to become healthier. There is never an age.
Amen. Vonda, thank you so much.
Thank you.